So, good morning from Canada, from Western Canada. So, it truly is an early morning for me. It's about quarter to just before 1 a.m. in the morning, but I'm delighted to be here with you. I wish I had the opportunity to be there in person. Unfortunately, right now we still have restrictions as far as entering back into Canada, and so I would have to go on an extended European vacation before they would allow me to come home and not have to quarantine for 2 weeks. So, uh, greetings from Canada. With us today, though, however, I think we're quite fortunate to have my colleague from Israel, Nadav Segal, is joining us. Nadav is what I would like to say an expert in medical cannabis. He is works in the Israeli medical cannabis market. Him and his partners actually through Blessed Cultivation were our very first client, our partner, who is using the Affixi program. And Nadav will be happy to talk to you a little bit about what he does and how we do it. There he is. I
Hey
think that's him
guys.
over in the corner. There he is.
Hey guys,
So,
hello.
so for you who've met him, a great guy with a lot of experience, and the whole purpose of our conversation today is kind of to talk about that experience and what we're doing. When we thought about this subject, dosing, where does the responsibility lie? It was really interesting because when you start to take a look at like how can we help grow this industry, and when we look at Europe versus Canada versus the United States versus Israel versus other parts of the developing world, let's say Australia and things that are coming online in different regions, there seems to be quite a story, right? And so when we got started on this project well over 5+ years ago, it really was about better outcomes for medical cannabis patients. And that's where really our focus is. And I'm going to tell you a little bit as we go through this, my own personal journey around this, which happened just as early as last quarter of last year. So to get started here, I'm going to get my slides going. Okay, make sure I know how to work this properly. All right. So recently we had the opportunity. I was at Prohibition Partners and we had a masterclass, and I was joined by our technologist partner, Brian Collins from Abbey Technology. He's an Irish guy living in Switzerland, and he had other similar commitments, so he couldn't join us today. But, one of the things when we looked at it, and Brian and I first started talking well over a year ago, and we started to put this system together, one of the things that's really come out to me, and I think you all know this, and I don't think I'm with this group that I'm, imparting any great knowledge. We're talking about a plant. Okay. And, in the master class, we talked about that. And then with one of the other classes that I did, is there a doctor in the house? We had two very smart doctors from the NHS system in the UK, Rebecca Moore and Dr. Mike Barnes. And the one thing that came through it is because it's a plant, it makes it very hard to test, right? And it's a very complex plant. It's probably one of the most complex plants in the whole world. And while we know what the majority of the molecules are, we don't know how they all work. And we do see things through the construct of the entourage effect. But one of the things that we found, and I think that's been really interesting, is that when we start to look at the construct of a clinical study, while it has some great aspects, it doesn't always work well on plants. And, I'd like to go, my grandmother's from Ireland. And so the joke is, that she would think potatoes, a very cliche, potatoes were good for everything. And part of that argument was, though, as we used to, we could say to her, well, Graham, it might be good for, let's say, potatoes might be good for knee swelling, but the next potato might not be because it's a potato. Challenge. We're not starting with a formulation. And when you start to think about that construct, as you all know, how do I know what comes out of the ground each time thereafter, let alone the genetics and the mapping? What about the controls and the structure that go through? There's an interesting article that came out of Canada, where one of the directors of Cannabis finance arm said, in North America, there's greater controls on growing tobacco than there is cannabis for the purposes of even medical cannabis in Canada. And I find that really telling when we're telling something to somebody, or we're expecting instructing doctors and other people to say, hey, you should prescribe this or you should do this, but because here's the information. And we can't guarantee what that product is. So even before we get to the dosing argument, we still have to look at the construct. Do we even have the right product to begin with? And is it consistent time over time over time? Quality, right? And quality is something very interesting in the construct of growing. And I think, from what you'll all see in your conversations with Nadav, this is something when we spent an enormous amount of time in 2018 and 17 in Israel, looking at the Israeli segment, we start to see the controls that were in place. By far not a perfect system, but a very rigid system. And I think it's something, if we hadn't gone full recreational in Canada, one of the things is for the medical program on the structures, especially from the downside from the manufacturer back towards the cultivator, that could have been utilized. And I think that bodes very well in Europe for what we can learn and apply in there. So getting into that personal story. So, I'm a 55-year-old guy, like everybody. It was time to have that colonoscopy. Obviously, I noticed a couple of things going on there, and this was last September 11th, of all great dates. And a week later, last year, 2020, I found out I had a form of colon cancer. And luckily, it was very early stage. And they said, so we're going to go out and we're going to start your regime. We're going to cure this for you, Brad. And I said, okay, so what does that look like? And they said, well, over a 5-week period, we're going to give you 25 radiation treatments. We're going to start you off on a full body chemo treatment on the first day. And then you're going to take oral chemo in the morning and in the evening. So in all, what we're going to have you do is 52 chemo treatments for the purpose of making your body more susceptible in that area, colon, susceptible to the radiation. I said, okay, let's go get at it, right? I wasn't very prepared for what was coming, what came from it. And I can tell you this is that there came a point in time through about the third and a half week, all the way, and that was the beginning of December, all the way through to the middle of February, when I was in a considerable amount of pain. As you can imagine, with different radiation isn't a burn, but it has the same kind of features of a burn. And I was in a lot of pain, a lot of discomfort. And I remember going to the cancer clinic in Vancouver and saying, what about cannabis? What can I take? And what would you suggest? And this is in Vancouver, and Vancouver's the west coast of Canada. It's and we would think that there would be some idea of understanding. And from the doctors there and the nurses there said, we don't know enough to tell you. And that's cemented as a patient, as myself feeling like a patient advocate throughout my whole time doing this. I now became the patient, and it was a very compelling story for me because even I, as somebody in it, who was I going to talk to? Where was the relationship? And, let alone talking, I couldn't, the radiation oncologist, the chemo oncologist wouldn't write me a prescription. I couldn't even go to my own GP. He goes, well, what do you want us to do? And so this hesitancy that's been there is not because they don't want to, it's that there's nothing to base it on. Where are the facts? And very quickly, it's always gone back to the point in the argument that we believe in, that there's two relationships here. There's a cultivator who creates the product and a consumer who ingests and uses the product. Everybody else's stance, and especially in cannabis right now, is part of that process. But in our mind, and like I said, we don't pretend to be cannabis experts. We'd like to say we're a blockchain company with a cannabis problem. Guys like Nadav are cannabis experts. But what we were really talking about, the anchoring of that relationship and how we can help people. This lack of what we call lack of data has, as we talked about earlier, has led to a variety of rules. And I think this graphic explains it all. And I don't think we're talking about, and just look at the EU. And I think that's very compelling. So when we start talking about moving product across, international borders, even within the construct of the EU, it gets very complicated. And I think that's something that we have to, I don't think obviously I'm not saying anything net new here. But I think really, once again, we do have to look at that construct of why. And for us, and what we did talk about with the doctors on Prohibition Partners on the NHS, they all agreed on one thing. It's a data problem. It's a lack of information. And as we all know, when the EU came out, I think it was 2018 Q4, they said very simply, we need to take it off Schedule 1, but, and it was a big but in capital BUT. We need more information. Our construct is that comes from information, comes from data, data comes from technology. So the burden on cultivators leads to problems. I had one that was in here before. I think we're probably all familiar with what our friends over at Canopy have gone through recently, and the construct of being under investigation by Health Canada for mislabeling. Okay. And, because I couldn't necessarily say this was for medical or this was for, or if it was for recreational purposes, the construct is they said everything has THC. Now, bring that back to the patient again. How could a doctor know what to give me if he doesn't even know what's on the product is correct? And so once again, there's this construct. And from what I've seen from speaking with Nadav at the show about quality. And once again, it's not just about quality, it's about what works. And once again, it's about if you're a cultivator or you're a manufacturer, you're involved in that process of facilitating that relationship between the consumer and the cultivator, you have to be on the construct that we need to identify things and take the burden off by just showing, like, for example, that you're going to an EU GMP standard or a good agricultural practice standard. Because once again, I couldn't imagine being a patient and at the same time going through what I was going through and suffering a seizure. I couldn't imagine. We've all heard about the use of cannabis for epilepsy. Well, could you imagine like if you're a mom in the suburbs and whose child is having, and you give them something, whether it's an edible, a tincture, or whatever, however they ingest it, whatever the modality is, and that they have a seizure because it wasn't properly labeled. And therein lies the problem. There lies the rub about everything. And this is where we think that the opportunity works. So we see, like I said, we said that by anchoring this. And so in 2019, after a lot of thought and a lot of work had gone in, we released a patent. It was called Cannabis on the Blockchain. And I don't say that for any great epiphany for anybody, but I was surprised, honestly, when we filed the patent, the lack of patents around that space and how easy it was to get approval on the patent for the application. And there was such there was a lot of stuff to do, and we're all it seemed like, put it this way, the construct of the blockchain was about criminality. It seemed to us that the largest thing that regulators were concerned about, and rightly so, was it illegal marijuana? Was it illegally obtained? Was the taxes being paid on it? And I think that's a very telling story, because it still doesn't get to the construct. It's one part of the story. It's an important part. But then the other part is about how to get back. We focused on the idea that we could get people, a cultivator and everybody in the supply chain side, right to the retailer and then the consumer, to attest to their experience, or test from the cultivation all the way through to the consumer's experience. You would then be working on the concept of 1 gram grown, 1 gram consumed. Okay, and I think that's worth stating over again, that 1 gram grown and 1 gram consumed. And if, put it this way, if you were wearing like an Apple Watch and you looked at the data points that came in over those 24-hour periods when there was an effect on your body, the data points from 1 cultivation gram all the way back, or sorry, a 4-hour period, it was 76,000 data points. And when you layer that, if you took that angle on it and you layered, let's say 500 people or 1,000 people all treating shoulder bursitis because the product was properly packaged and marketed, and you layered that all on top and then ran an algorithm through it to find out the average, what we call an averaged efficacy per se, you would then be able to feed information back. And hopefully you saw by that graphic, as the information moves through, it's picked up. The consumer part picks up the rating. And so that's essentially what we did and what we built is we built it. And you layer, then feed that information back to everybody in the ecosystem, starting with the patient so they can look at what other people are saying, but all the way back to the regulator, the supply chain, and obviously to the cultivator. Sometimes it can be, as Nadav will tell you, it can be as simple as a change in pH levels in water can dramatically affect the pharmaceutical ingredients, or what we call the construct of the entourage effect. And so there's some really important things in there. By grabbing enough data on a 1 gram grow and 1 gram consume basis, we as a company have a goal to capture over 124,000 grams, excuse me, 124 million grams. Is that right? Yeah, 124 million grams over a 2-year period, which kind of roughly works out to about 300,000 people measuring each thing and then layering it is. And it's as simple as you're going to see in this short little video that we're going to show you afterwards. The construct is, and the idea is that every gram has to be accounted for. Every experience around the gram has to be accounted for. And then I want to get into the argument a little bit. And after you watch this video, we'll cue it up and play it now, Michael, is that when you put all that together and you take that and you see the outliers, you're now getting into the construct of getting into personalized medicine. And this is what's very interesting about it for us, because the big data won't lie around it, right? Best growing practices, the struggles that companies have about genetics. This is a very simple concept. Hopefully you see that. It's as easy as opening an e-wallet. Again, a crypto wallet, using a smartphone to attest. When people turn around and they scan that simple QR code that we put on that a cultivator puts on a package all the way through, and they scan it, they can see everything. This is probably, as many of you are in Europe, this is not a new construct in, for example, on foodstuffs in Switzerland. But the attestation on the blockchain then allows for the truthfulness of it. And most importantly, when a consumer then attests their experience to that gram, now we've got something. And to that point, I would like, I could ask if Michael could, or whoever on the show site could start that product video. Bear with us a short 3 minutes. I know you've been watching this ad, but I think you'll hopefully get something out of that, and then we'll take some questions.
Powered by TraceLocker, Citizen Green Ifixi is the world's first blockchain-powered RegTech compliance solution that enables a fast, agile registration of medical cannabis and CBD products. Simple, secure, and intuitive, Ifixi was designed with leading medical cannabis and CBD cultivators from Israel, Canada, and Switzerland, and was built to align with their cultivation, distribution, and compliance processes. Let's follow the journey of our favorite medical cannabis grower, Susan, as she uses Ifixi to help her successfully grow, test, and ship her products to market. Ifixi allows growers like Susan to record each of the critical steps involved in cultivating and distributing. At the heart of Ifixi lays a powerful blockchain back office that ensures every piece of information is recorded, secured, and associated with a verified user, a recording process called attestation. Each user profile is created by establishing a blockchain e-wallet on their smartphone through the TraceLocker KYC app that verifies a person's identity during registration. All personal contact information, including photo ID, is validated according to local regulations and in compliance with international AML standards. Only verified users may record events. Using her smartphone's Face ID, Susan enters cannabis event details that are immutably notarized on a blockchain. Ifixi has made the process seamless so that every step of Susan's cannabis product journey can be thoroughly verified by regulators, customs officials, and consumers. Excited to get started, Susan uses the Ifixi app to set up her company's profile, including logo and grow location. Next, she defines the base mother plant for each product grow, including the genome and seed, as she records all relevant information related to the mother plant's life cycle. Susan's farm has multiple large greenhouses with separate grow zones. Susan is ready to start growing a cannabis batch. All the steps from taking cuttings, taking pictures, noting the growing zone, watering times, pesticide use, and lighting can all be logged using the app, right up to harvesting. With her batch ready for sale, Susan takes that next step, product testing by a lab. She creates a lab profile that includes the lab name, address, and the weight of the test sample. Then she takes a photograph of the shipping label. When the lab verifies potency and terpene analysis, Susan takes a picture of the lab report, and now this entire cannabis batch is shown to be legally compliant and ready to be packaged and sent to the market. Ifixi continues to help Susan in her business's next phase, getting her cannabis product to a distributor or retailer. Using the app's proprietary process management, Susan creates a unique QR code for her shipment called a digital twin. The shipper puts the QR code onto the shipment, so when a customs agent scans her Ifixi QR code, a web page opens that provides all the relevant information about Susan's shipment. All the attested events entered by Susan and her team are viewable through a QR code scan. Because this information is tamper-proof and attested to by a natural entity, the agent is happy to authorize the shipment for entry, and soon Susan's products are ready for sale. Finally, the distributor that receives Susan's shipment scans the QR code using his app, thus making the digital twin QR code as delivered, thereby preventing the cloning of such valuable QR codes by potential bad actors. From cultivation to retail, only Ifixi's unique application of advanced RegTech technology guarantees consumers that Susan's products are compliant and are the right choice for them.
Well, that was great. Thank you. So hopefully everybody got that made sense. Obviously next week, the roundtable, I believe on Monday, June 28th at 5 p.m. Central Eastern Standard Time, or European time, sorry. We're going to have a roundtable. We'll be able to answer more things. Also, Nadav is there. I think you should really speak with him, because Nadav's, it's interesting, him and his partners actually for this product used it for Blessed. Actually, the Israeli regulator actually okayed this product for them to do all their compliance reporting. And guys, it's as simple as you need a QR code and a smartphone. That's it, right? It's not really that overly complicated in the construct of how to use it and get going. And it is, as far as a compliance tool. CBD Agricasa, one of the largest CBD producers, is putting that QR code on it, and for the purpose of consumers understanding and increasing sales. So listen, when we get back to that finishing, I want to take some questions about the construct and the argument of dosing. It's got to start from somewhere, and it has to start from the right product, and we have to measure it. Once we measure enough, then we can come back and give enough data all the way through. I think like one of the things you'll see here, when you take a look at some of the work that we're doing and different levels of information and understanding for just in the Canadian product side alone, we've really got a kind of a good handle on the direction that we're going and the things we'll be able to do. So to that point, I'm happy to take any questions, and Nadav is happy to take any questions. He can show you the product. Floor is open.